Hey, this is Khan from Ninja Pulls. Magicka Dragonknight is still super popular, especially in late game PvE. If your group has Encratis, is using pillagers on cooldown and nuking bosses fast, this class really shines. But even without all that stuff, it has great damage, it's really fun and looks cool as hell. These guys light their enemies on fire and then literally whip their asses. You don't want to fuck with the Dragonknight. This static rotation should be accessible to pretty much anyone who isn't totally new to ESO. Gear is flexible too, there are plenty of substitute sets you can use while collecting the ones you want. The only major variable is weaving and bar swap speed, and that's just practice, so don't sweat it. If you're thinking, 120k isn't that great, keep in mind that the dummy isn't the perfect showcase. There are support sets missing which boost the Dragonknight more than other classes, plus there's a lot of cleave damage which doesn't show up here. Place 2 more dummies nearby and the same rotation and setup jumps from 120k to 200k DPS. Again, not a perfect benchmark, any class would get a DPS bump from this, but the Dragonknight gets so much, even on a single target setup. There are so many fights in the game where that kind of cleave is really valuable. Finally, MagDK can get close to 130k this patch, if you go fully dynamic, use heroism potions, and track proc cooldowns at the very least. I fully respect anyone who does this, but most of us are happy to skip these steps and still get 120k. That's generally what I do on this channel, static rotations that are strong but easy to replicate, especially in content when you have other stuff to focus on. Gear and abilities are pretty standard. Here's a mini guide to give you guys a quick reference, grab it in the description below and please share it. There's also a lot more detail over at ninjapulls.com, the Dragonknight page is fully updated for Necrom and I'm working my way through the rest. Gear. We're stacking 3 damage over time procs for a combined 20k DPS, which is hilarious. Reliquien is easy to keep up, deals big damage and it's a medium set with minor slayer. Perfect. A bonus feature is that it deals more damage if your weaving is slow, because the dot ticks every 1.05 seconds or so, and is refreshed by each light attack. So, if a light attack arrives a little late, you get 2 ticks for the price of 1. I still recommend weaving fast if you can, but it's nice that Reliquien softens the penalty a bit. If you don't have a single priority target, swap it for something like Yandir, Ansul if you need pen, or move Nirn to the body and grab a light set with minor slayer like Siroria or Whirl. Zaan is unbeatable if you're at melee range. There's a bit of bonus cleave and the extra burning is really strong on a DK. You absolutely want this set for bosses. As for the backbar, honestly, Pillar of Nirn isn't ideal for a 15-second static rotation. The proc is 10 seconds, so we will have downtime and lose a bit of damage. But there aren't really any great alternatives. I can't think of any procs of comparable power that we can fire and forget about for 15 seconds. So you either have to track the proc, accept the damage loss, or hit the forums and ask Zos for a 15-second proc set. One reason not to get too hung up on this is that you'll often use different sets in content anyway. Whirl for cleave, Tsogvin for mobility, or maybe you're on Zen duty. Whatever the reason, it's nice to have a rotation that works regardless of gear. Speaking of which, abilities. On the dummy, Stampede works best because it deals more damage than Blockade of Fire and it takes pressure off our Magicka Sustain. Deadly Cloak with Black Rose Daggers makes the rotation a bit simpler, but again it makes Sustain rougher because of the longer gaps between stamina dot recasts. A 2H backbar is also great because it lets us use Carve, amazing in long fights. Next, we want Trap for minor force, Degeneration for brutality and sorcery. You can drop this if you've got molten armaments in the group, and Inner Light for prophecy and savagery. We don't need this on the front bar because Flames of Oblivion grants it already. Add Eruption to the back bar. Because this has an upfront hit and no upfront cost, we can recast it early after 10 seconds to ease Magicka Sustain without much damage loss. That's a trick worth knowing even if you don't always need the extra sustain in content. And that leaves room for Venomous Claw, Burning Talons, and of course, Molten Whip. The best champion point slottables for this setup are Deadly Aim because about 58% of our damage is single target, and Thaumaturge because about 58% of our damage comes from dots. The fact that these percentages are the same is pure coincidence. Once you've picked these, grab Exploiter and Wrathful Strikes for the dummy or for optimized groups. For unoptimized stuff like dungeons, you might want to look at things like Force of Nature for penetration, Backstabber and Fighting Finesse for crit damage, and if you've got all of that covered but aren't getting decent off-balance uptimes, you can drop Exploiter and look at Master at Arms or Biting Aura, depending on what you're fighting. Consumables. Maximum Magicka food, any top level fruit recipe will do, because that got me the best stats and the most damage. And because I like being able to switch to max health food in tough content without completely killing my sustain. But you will need Tri-Restoration potions on the dummy, and even then Magicka gets pretty tight in execute, and you may need to skip a couple of talons to stay in business. If you really don't like it or can't make it work, feel free to ditch the max Magicka food and use Ghastly Eyeball with weapon power potions or Spider Skewers with spell power potions. The DPS loss is small either way, and then you can also replace Degen with Scalding Rune for a little more damage and burning ticks. I didn't use heroism potions here, but they are really nice on a DK. They bring your ults and burst windows closer together, driving up DPS and easing pressure on sustain. That's why they're so handy in top tier groups that are pushing score. But most of us aren't worried about that, and I operate on the assumption that you guys don't want to spend 12k gold every time you hump the dummy. Enough detail. There's a lot more we could get into, but let's move on to the actual rotation. Pre-buff with 3 Flames of Oblivion, Trap and Standard. Then it's 3 sequences of 5 seconds. Talons, Stampede, Eruption, Carve, Degeneration, Talons, Claw, and 3 Whips. Talons, 2 Whips, Carve, Oblivion, and Restart. Normally I'd drop Standard after all my dots are up, but I know that I'm just gonna have room for another Standard in Execute, so it's better to dump it immediately for more uptime across the entire fight. Recast Trap, Degen and Claw dynamically. Degen and Claw are both 24 seconds, so you can lump those two together. Carve is 32 seconds, so after the first couple of rotations it should come around at the same point after Stampede and Eruption every second rotation. As for Flames of Oblivion, you've got a couple of options. You can recast it statically every 15 seconds, but in practice it actually lasts about 16. So if your weaving is fast, you'll skip the final fireball and lose a quarter of the damage. That kinda sucks, so I recast it dynamically and occasionally early to keep Seething Fury stacks from resetting. None of this is priority stuff, so don't worry about it until you're really comfortable with the rotation and are hitting 110k or more. Then maybe start looking at this stuff. Watch your ult carefully and drop Standard the instant it becomes available. It drags up your DPS every time, so it looks like a waveform. Mine peaks at 131 at the start before dropping to 115, jumps to 119 with the second Standard, and dips down to 118 again before the last Standard, which brings it up to 120. That's why Pillager's Prophet makes such a big difference, especially in short or bursty fights where it lets you keep your Standard up almost all the time, not to mention all the extra resources we get. At the end of the day, a lot of things are different in content. Dummy humping like this is just practice, which is why I try to present a rotation that works in a variety of situations. With this one, I really like the fact that if you have Kratos in your group, you can swap to an Inferno backbar with Blockade and nothing else needs to change. If you go for a Maelstrom Inferno, just drop Zahn and you're done. I hope this helps you guys get some higher numbers and quicker kills, and maybe gives you a bit more confidence with Magicka Dragonknight. Check out the other videos on this channel, as well as the NinjaPulls website and Discord server, where you can share your passes and get personalized tips if you want. You can also join the in-game guild. We've got a lot of prog groups and teaching runs, and stream a lot of it on Twitch as well. Thanks for watching. Happy whipping.